High Court has suspended the Finance Minister's announcement of a VAT increase, which was meant to take effect on Thursday. It comes after the Democratic Alliance, Economic Freedom Fighters and Minister Enoch Godongwana settled out of court. The court also set aside Parliament's adoption of the fiscal framework. The EFF and the Democratic Alliance, who challenged the move, have been awarded legal costs. Both the Finance Minister and Parliament were ordered to pay 50% each. Well, joining us, of course, is to give us their reaction is the EFF's spokesperson, Sinawo Thambo. Sinawo, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to your reaction as the EFF, having seen that order of the court, welcoming it, I imagine.
Absolutely. We welcome the court order from the Western Cape High Court, which now legally, lawfully and bindingly suspends the 0.5% VAT increases which were meant to take place on the 1st of May 2025, but also sets aside the legally adopted fiscal framework and revenue proposals, which were adopted by the Standing Committee on Finance on the 1st of April and the National Assembly on the 2nd of April, because we've always argued that the process that occurred in those meetings, wherein we sit, were irregular and procedural, and we even warned the Speaker of Parliament on the 2nd of April that we will be taking it to court. So this is a vindication that we as the EFF were correct, but also it is a vindication that in terms of protecting constitutionalism and the integrity of Parliament as the process where you can actually implement or reverse legislation. We saw in the past week the African National Congress, alongside a lot of bridesmaids, political parties which supported their illegal fiscal framework and VAT increases, pronouncing a reversal of a VAT increase based on a media statement by the Minister of Finance where he said he intends to reverse the VAT hike. Now, that was not legally binding, that was not lawful, and anyone who took that as a representation that there won't be VAT hikes on the 1st of May was misled. Now, this court order effectively says that, for example, the ignorant statement by the South African Revenue Services, which stated that there will be 15% and 15.5% VAT hikes operating concurrently until the 15th of May, are nonsensical and unlawful. So we are extremely pleased with this process, and I think we should affirm at this moment in time that, as the Commander-in-Chief and President of the EFF said in the Freedom Day rally held in Brandfort in the Free State, as we're sitting here together as South Africans, South Africa does not have a budget under Cyril Ramaphosa's government.
Yeah, let us into what happened before we see this order of the court that is being shared with us, and obviously we share with the nation the breaking news that officially, according to the court as well, that VAT increase not going to happen. And I think that needs to be emphasized. But in the back end, what would have taken place? Was it the finance minister's legal team reaching out to yourselves, or what did that conversation look like? Sinawo, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Yeah, go ahead.
The conversation occurred in the sense that the Minister of Finance outlines in his papers that he has been swayed by recent developments as it relates to the fiscal framework and revenue proposals and the VAT increases, and that he sees that he did not have the necessary political support to proceed with the VAT hikes. Now, that lack of necessary political support, he says he came to that realization on the 21st of April, because before that, he was of the belief that there was sufficient support in the National Assembly for those VAT hikes. And that sufficient support, he drew that conclusion from the fact that he had a support for his fiscal framework, which contained those 0.5% increases from political parties such as Action SA, Build One South Africa of Musi Maimane, Rise Mzansi of Songa Zizibi, amongst many other political parties. And it was the court processes last week where Advocate Nugai Toby demolished the arguments of the Minister of Finance and of Parliament, which has swayed his opinion. So there's been no conversation of settlement up until today, when the Western Cape High Court judges called us into court, and that is where this resolution is coming from. But the affidavit by the Minister of Finance, which he supplied as a supplementary affidavit this afternoon to the Western Cape High Court, is quite telling in two ways, Naledi. It states that the Minister of Finance intended to implement the 0.5% VAT increases on the 1st of May, despite the proposals he received from political parties. And we were misled this week by some political parties that there's a reversal of the VAT hike as a result of engagements with the minister. The minister has rubbished those claims. The Minister of Finance has said that those proposals were not sufficient and he intended to proceed with the VAT increases. So the critical importance of this court judgment can never be overlooked. It is the only legitimate process which has stopped the VAT hikes on the 1st of May. And I think South Africans should become to appreciate that, but begin to appreciate that The consequences of this are that we and the Democratic Alliance had in the Standing Committee on Finance proposed amendments to the fiscal framework where the Minister of Finance was able to would have been able to consider them over a period of 2 days, as according to the Money Bills Amendment Act. Now, these political parties voted against those amendments and those proposals by us in the Standing Committee on Finance and proceeded to do some unprocedural and illegal adoption of the fiscal framework there. And they said they were doing this because they intended to save South Africa from not having a budget. The consequences of the actions of the African National Congress, of BOSA, of Action SA, of Rise Mzansi now, are that South Africa doesn't have a budget because they tried to pass a fiscal framework illegally. So we are here today in a crisis of a nation without a budget because of the incompetence of the ANC and the illegality that was supported by Herman Mashaba, by Musi Maimane, by Songezo Zibi, by Gayton Mackenzie, by Mzonele Nyonso of the PAC, and by Hanif Hendricks of Al Jamaa. These political parties must be remembered as having thrown South Africa into a fiscal crisis, and they must be condemned by history for that.
Yeah, of course, the argument of the EFF has, for the longest time, also been around the process. You say the adoption of the fiscal framework being irregular, the process now, and it's important then to look at what happens next, what it is that you'll be watching out for to ensure that the process that we see moving forward is regular and not irregular, if you will, but also there is the issue around just how much wrangling needs to happen and what role the EFF then plays in what we do in the meantime. When you do have a finance minister that has argued that there is a 75 billion rand shortfall in that budget.
Look, the Speaker of the National Assembly has just now released a communication which we will share with the public, where she has said the budget process now needs to begin from scratch. So that confirms what we've been saying, what the President of the EFF has said this afternoon, that South Africa is without a budget. So the Minister of Finance is now expected to table the budget of South Africa for the third time. Remember, this is happening for the third time now. On the 19th of February, it was postponed. One was presented on the 12th, later on in March, on the 12th of March to be exact. And now he has to come back and present another one because of their attempts of illegality and taxing the poor and middle class of South Africa. So we are aware that the Minister of Finance is claiming that the next budget is going to table, we must take fiscal responsibility. And I think something nonsensical was said by the leader of Rise Mzansi in an article on the City Press this afternoon as well, that we must now take responsibility when they are the ones who should be held to account, because they said they want a reversal of the VAT hikes through their alternative proposals, which they considered with the Minister of Finance for 30 days. Now that has been rubbished as a lie. So they must take responsibility for the fiscal crisis that we're in, number one. Number two, as the EFF, we're not going to support a budget that is going to have a 75 billion shortfall that will be accounted for through austerity measures. That is by cutting spending in terms of health, education, or by cutting the social grants of South Africa, or not increasing them in accordance with inflation. We won't support a budget like that. We will table an alternative revenue generation mechanism that doesn't require us to cut spending on critical frontline services. And that is what we're going to do once this new fiscal framework, which is tabled, comes to the Standing Committee on Finance. So the EFF has now taught Parliament, the Minister of Finance, and the delinquent political parties that supported this entire chaos a lesson in legislation and procedure. And we're going to go to the Standing Committee on Finance and do it again, because we're not going to sit there and adopt a fiscal framework and budget that is going to want to cut money and spending for the services of the poor. We're going to provide alternatives, and they must be considered in earnest. Otherwise, this country is going to go off a fiscal cliff, and that will be due to a Minister of Finance who doesn't want to accept that taxation is not the only way to raise revenue, that taxation is not the only way to ensure that South Africa has stability in terms of a fiscal framework. So they must consider the proposals we're going to make in the Standing Committee on Finance on the new budget, but they must expect further proper processes and lecturing and teaching of political procedures in Parliament by the EFF.
All right. There you have it. EFF spokesperson there, Sinawo Thambo, speaking to us on that story where we see the High Court in the Western Cape suspending the VAT, so that 0.5 percentage point VAT hike.